Underworld Radio. Who we got on the line?
It's your boy Neefy Cab, back
Ooh,
in
yeah.
action.
The new age of hip hop, pop, pop.
You know how he did it. I knew it. I already knew.
It's Underworld, and I'm here rapping it in it, and I ain't got no words to say, but that's what to do. It's Underworld, Underworld, oh style.
Like a pharaoh to the queen when they made love. The king born to show the world what I made of. Best of the best, yes. Even when I'm at my worst, killing time, killing every beat, killing every rhyme, killing every line. Die first. I'm a star when I spit these bars. I go so hard, I hate leaving. Praise God that I'm on my job, cause I be in the eyes and I break even. Wanna feel but don't feel my hunger. Ice grill wanna steal my thunder. Tryna rain in my parade, but operating your rain with a big umbrella. Ella. When you wanna cause pain to somebody doing things that you wanna be a part of. But you can't, so you raving, you ran at any given chance instead of working harder. I being smarter. Yeah, I'm staying in my lane, doing my thing and trying to break through. Yeah, I'm changing the game, but I'm staying the same. When you was hitting, I didn't hate you. Everybody crying, but they come for the big time. Don't wanna grind, and they want some of this shine. Barely got a dime, every some of them is fine. I don't know about you, but I'm gonna get mine. Everybody crying, but they come for the big time. Don't wanna grind, and they want some of this shine. Barely got a dime, every some of them is fine. I don't know about you, but I'm gonna get mine. I take it and run with it, that's how I ball. Hogging these shots, that's what I call. Going Kobe on y'all, yeah, I'm driving in the lane. Beat, now I can stand the rain. He hard. Wanna see me fall, but you see me leaving y'all in the dust. Caused me to cuss. The regulator dropped the bomb and I'm the detonator. Going up the escalator, dropped the bomb and y'all are hella haters. When fall came and y'all knew it, blew it. Talk big dreams, but you still didn't do it. I believe you can achieve it, but if you really mean it, then you live and breathe it. Till then I believe it when I see it. You watch things happen, great things happen. You wonder what happened, I made things happen. I'm the head of the street fan, running with the best. You the end of the week, man, WTF. Everybody crying, but they come for the big time. Don't wanna grind and they want some of this shine. Barely got a dime, every some of them is fine. I don't know about you, but I'm gonna get mine. Everybody crying, but they come for the big time. Don't wanna grind and they want some of this shine. Barely got a dime, every some of them is fine. I don't know about you. Round and around, you be turning me, you're spurring me, you're burns in me. Did you go big for eternity? But ain't no hurting me, and no diverting me from my goals and aspirations. Negative thoughts out of my concentration. Focus, man, on my future success. Good brothers all vexed and distressed by the skills I possess. What a mess, I confess. I wanna be a model, of course I'm a scholar. Entrepreneur, your father, pocket more of my daughters. Watch it about it with the thought of it demise. They try to bring me down, but still I arise, recognize. Stacking up chips to go wide, surprise. Got a gleam in my eyes, me a Dollar Tree and realize pride. For both my sons now on the run, just to be second to none, the number one. If you get mad, I don't care. Stay down in the barrel that y'all crap share. Kiss the dairy air of an MC square. Debonair, legendary scorer like Jordan in the air. Yeah, everybody crying, but they come for the big time. Don't wanna grind and they want some of this shine. Barely got a dime, every some of them is fine. I don't know about you, but I'm gonna get mine. Everybody crying, but they come for the big time. Don't wanna grind and they want some of this shine. Barely got a dime, every some of them is fine. I don't know about you, but I'm gonna get mine.
Coast to coast, the new age of hip hop, pop. The new age of hip hop, pop.
What is this? This is a Northeast Productions
You know what? Whoa, IDGAF when they play this song. Sing along, Kush Cologne. Make your missus ask what kind of string you on. Fucking final, all these niggas, they just throw a name on strong. Just that dizzy dope, that fizzy flow, like who you gaming on? I done been around like Equator, shit got deep like voice on Darth Vader. Tryna make a wish as the stars wore everything I wanted since Sega. Saga started, I got retarded on every ball and shot classic coasters. But my young boy had the white back against the wall like them taxi posters. Now I just recorded on a program, in a mix like a slow jam. Got a nigga bopping like a toe jam. Hope she feel up on that when we slow dance. Think I'm Romeo, she tryna roll, man. See your hand ain't what I'm tryna hold, man. This ain't half time, I don't show bands, and you know, man. I don't give a fuck. When it comes down to the bullshit they airing, we don't want no more. When it comes down to it, we the ones they can't pay, can't lie, cause they know. We lie, we lit, we so gone and they can't take no more. IDGAF, exit stage left, that's when they play the song. When it comes down to the bullshit they airing, we don't want no more. When it comes down to it, we the ones they can't pay, can't lie, cause they know. We lie, we lit, we so gone and they can't take no more. IDGAF, exit stage left, that's when they play the song.
I'm live in the kitchen, whipping the work, pitching the heat. Wrist automatic, I rock on the sleep. It's footed below in these streets, cold in the cooler. Ice your medulla, Ricky the ruler, I'm slick. Brain in the whip, quizzing your bitch, you go dummy on dick. Retarded as shit, tsunami, I'm lit. Wavy, I'm wavy, jock in the drip. Glock on me kick, 808 boom in your thinker. Empty the clip, speed through your city. Lego the click, snapping, connecting the dots. Atomically bombing the spot, hotter than lava. Higher dimension, avoiding your privilege. Lights with the vision, the rhyme and spit in the sea. Astrology over your head, I'm doper than opium mans, reviving the dead. Heard you was sick, here take a fix of the boy. I'm banging a 10, say hello to my friend. Act like you wanna get shanked with a pen. Look at them choke, I ain't giving a fuck. We tryna get paid in love with the guap. Give me the rollie and Mikey Shrew.
When it comes down to the bullshit they airing, we don't want no more. When it comes down to it, we the ones they can't fake, can't lie, cause they know. We lie, we lit, we so gone and they can't take no more. IDGAF, exit stage left, that's when they play the song. When it comes down to the bullshit they airing, we don't want no more. When it comes down to it, we the ones they can't fake, can't lie, cause they know. We lie, we lit, we so gone and they can't take no more. IDGAF, exit stage left, that's when they play the song.
Beast, the artist.
So there should be some things that you all should know about me beyond what was said.
I'm fighting my addiction. Nothing is the same, got a different whole look on life. I'm fighting my addiction. Everything changed in my mind, I feel this can't be life. I'm fighting my addiction. Always quick to judge, no one is standing by my side. I'm fighting my addiction. I try to give it up, something's always on the other side. I'm fighting my addiction. I'm fighting my addiction. Fighting my
As a baby, I seen a lot of shit that changed my life. Pops bagging up dope, mom's trying to hit the pipe. Both of them addicts, it's even harder trying to make it right. Easy to judge, you an addict, just a different type. Reflection of my parents, I couldn't, I rode a different bike. Could have been in and out of jail, I chose to hold the mic. The time I did in prison, hearing my bunkie get sick at night. Sometimes he wanted to give up, sometimes he had the strength to fight. So many overdoses, a needle bringing you back to life. Taking every drug, not thinking to see if the batch was right. Fuck a stroke, I tell you exactly what took my father's life. Fighting demons and he fought them face to face with all his might.
Yeah. Nothing is the same, got a different whole look on life. I'm fighting my addiction. Everything changed in my mind, I feel this can't be life. I'm fighting my addiction. Always quick to judge, no one is standing by my side. I'm fighting my addiction. I try to give it up, something's always on the other side. I'm fighting my
Man, I wish you
addiction.
could've changed. Now you long gone. Shit start getting strange when I see you hiding both arms. Started with the weed, now cocaine. Need I go on? You leaving your kids, think that's okay? Nah, it's so wrong. You left them with no foundation. nothing to hold on. Crack did his job, now you need something to doze on. Needle in the arm or something to put your nose on. And that to a team, a deal you couldn't close on. Setting your niggas up just so you can get your smoke on. Wrong batch is the same batch you would overdose on. Me in the hospital, doctors tell him to hold on. Karma is a bitch, she came back and hit you so strong. It's not just the addict that pays, but it's the families. It's not just the families that pays, but it's the kids and the kids' future that pays. Keep fighting.
Fighting my addiction. Nothing is the same, got a different outlook on life. I'm fighting my addiction. Everything changed in my mind, I feel this can't be life. I'm fighting my addiction. Always put the judge, no one is standing by my side. I'm fighting my addiction. I try to give it up, something's always on the other side.
If I whisper something in your ear and tell you something sweet that you wanna hear, or would you mind if I laid you down and kiss on you and do all the freaky things you want me to? Could you believe I can feel all your fantasies? So close your eyes and take my hand, come to me. Girl, there's no question I can give you everything you need, mentally, emotionally, and sexually. It's gonna be you, and me. Under the covers, girl, we grinding slowly, doing all the things that you want me to do to you. It's gonna be you, and me. Under the covers, girl, we grinding slowly, doing all the things that you want me to do to you. Girl, I know that I will always stay true. No need to look no further, I'm in front of you. How would you like it if I spent it all on you? Shopping sprees and diamond rings, it's all brand new. And don't you worry about your shoulders, cause I got them too. Yes, I will be the kind of father that they never knew. It's gonna be you. It's gonna be you. It's gonna be you, and me. Under the covers, girl, we grinding slowly, doing all the things that you want me to do to you. It's gonna be you, and me. Under the covers, girl, we grinding slowly, doing all the things that you want me to do to you. It's gonna be you, and me. Under the covers, girl, we grinding slowly, doing all the things that you want me to do to you. It's gonna be
The new age of hip hop.
Download all Underworld Radio mix CDs. DJ JFK presents at undergroundentertainment.bandcamp.com. That's undergroundentertainment.bandcamp.com. Or you could go to www.underworld.com. Download all our mix CDs and DVDs, merchandise, and whatever. Support the movement, which is Underworld.
Save me from the start. Save me from the start so I can be free.
You know.
Save me from the start.
Okay.
Save me from the start. Like a roaring thunder. Like a roaring thunder. So I can be free.
Homie, he was gifted but was with the shits. Easily persuaded, first to ride, living to die. Kinda hopeless, sold to the smokers, perk for the poppers, never was sober. Christmas approaching, holiday season, pockets is empty, Timberlands leaning, kinda depressing. He feeling desperate, felt he had to get his daughter a present. Son with a bike, mommy want Nikes, his name was Mike. This was his life, always felt the pressure by the ones that was close. Suffering from the oddity of keeping up with the Jones. Oh boy, he looking for a jokes cause his girl wants toys. Mike's mother idolized materials, so we grew up placing worldly items on a pedestal. And now we down to send you to heaven too. For it, he'll commit to that, probably get you hit for that. Pull up, put the mat to see your back, and this is a fact. Plotted on the jewelry store hit. Figured if he run up in there with a fully loaded clip, a black bag that fill up to the tip, ski mask with the hoodie low. He can do it quickly, make it come up and be good to go. Desperation, it can lead you to your deathbed. Niggas down to risk it all and sleep in jail beds. Mike was thinking foolishly, ran up in it stupidly. He can give a fuck about togetherness and unity.
Save me from the start. Save me from the start so I can be free. Save me from the start. Save me from the start. Like a roaring thunder. Like a roaring thunder.
On the pop right out the back room, shotty on him. Aimed at Michael, told him drop it, this your final warning. This was something Michael didn't expect. When you young and full of greed, you'll do the most for a check. The store clerk told the owner, don't shoot though. Looked at Michael's eyes, saw the pain, said I used to be you, bro. We can call the cops, have you charged with armed robbery. But I don't think a prison is the place you ought to be. You ought to be free, you don't really wanna do this. You got your finger on the trigger, you don't wanna pull it. Nigga, you lost in the sauce for real. You letting others' expectations make you rob and steal. Living a life with your mind in the shackles. Just another victim to a system that they lie about religion. Creating holidays and advertising. Got you spending money that you never had. Buying things, that's only a fad. And you surrounded by ignorance. The ones around you skipping bills to cop the iPhone. They got their babies in designer, but what's funny, they still living in their mom's home. Anything to get a couple comments and likes. Glorifying bullshit that ain't important in life. All they wants and expectations stem from media hype. Switch your focus, young people. Pick a different path. Free your mind from decisions that can end up your last, you know.
Save me from the start. Save me from the start so I can be free. Save me from the start.
That's right.
Save me from the start.
Free yourself.
Like
free your mind.
Like a
erase the ignorance
so I can be free.
See, Mike is willing to risk his freedom to put gifts under the tree. That same desperation could have resulted in somebody's life. It's time we pick apart this system, these holidays, these religions, and ask why. It's time to be the outcast, it's time to rebel. See, the world's gonna continue the war. Ain't gonna stop. We're gonna continue to fight, but we gotta overcome the war within ourselves. And win.
I went and turned a few bars into a gold mine. Now these whack rappers giving me the evil eye. They done opened up the door and let a beast inside. I'm putting jobs on the line, they can't sleep at night. Real reason why these rappers taking acting classes. Law falling off, really, I just can't imagine. Been on beats like I'm talking to a therapist. Get pissed, hit the studio and drop a hit. Be lit, lost, stay with the candle flow. Words leave my lips and travel all across the globe. They rocking off their phone, me I'm rocking off the dome. Spit my verse like I'm on stage at a show. One take, yeah, smell the loop, we taking over. Can't recall the last time I had to lay it over. Drop 16s, 32s, and 48s. On my life, rap substitute me selling weight. And my album date a national holiday. It's like Thanksgiving Day, waiting on a plate. Food for thought, man, my music like soul food. Watch me flash across the screen like breaking news. Spit the ugly truth, now my gang sitting pretty. Move my family to the burbs from the inner city. Kinda witty how your boy put it all together. Ross and Legend, magnificent, we rich forever. Cemetery pockets filled with dead presidents. Fans see me in the streets, they hopping out their skin. When I'm in a really good situation. Freedom wrong where I want, but the crib gated. I'm rated #1, cause I'm out here #2. Scratch performing at the club, get paid to walk through it. Finally doing everything I ever dreamed of. About to start ghost writing.
Come as a bitch, 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 come as a bitch. And revenge is a motherfucker that I fuck with. Come as a bitch, and revenge is a motherfucker that I fuck with. Come as a bitch, 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 come as a bitch. And revenge is a motherfucker that I fuck with. Come as a bitch, and revenge is a motherfucker that I fuck with.
You know how that cone be working, stay in your lane, you be swerving. What have you heard? And how you put behind the curtains? Bullets cut through you like surgeons. Put your pictures by the candles, lay you in pieces, dismantle. Clicking buttons on the chopper, like we flip it through the channels. Run up and you can get canceled. Pussycat niggas throw tantrums, then I sit down with commander, like on the sandals. My nigga, we paid it full, have you heard up for ransom? Y'all closet be trusting these hoes, like boy y'all be cuffing these hoes. But crazy thing is, most these niggas really be hoes, just up in men clothes. Y'all see the way, new way be stunning. We hit hard like that bass when it's thumping. When we pull up to your spot, you know it's us, cause your squad gon' be running. They think that we playing a song. Flying holler shit, so they gon' be ducking from Dallas, Texas, so you know we ain't bluffing. We wild life niggas, so you know that we bucket.
Come as a bitch, 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 come as a bitch. And revenge is the motherfucker that I fuck with. Come as a bitch, and revenge is the motherfucker that I fuck with. Come as a bitch, 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 come as a bitch. And revenge is the motherfucker that I fuck with. Come as a bitch, and revenge is the motherfucker that I fuck with.
Come as a bitch, Molly say lit, come as so trash. Molly spares you with all of that cash. Hey niggas, get hit with that pass. Taking niggas feelings for a 9 smash. False on them niggas, you know that's coming. Papa niggas, now that crap for they mama. And that's Texas rockin' all that designer. Females go digger, so I'm not gonna sign them. Yeah, they say I am so cocky. Ice on my wrist, looking rocky. Hating niggas can't stop me. Molly, you know what I with it. Any nigga hate can get it. Molly stay lit in the bed. Got a lot of cash, don't need to hit legs. Females choosing, so they take pics. Mess with no, we break up them sticks. We break up them sticks. To the nigga girl, now she showing me tricks. I'm money made a liquor, but she selling them dicks. Molly still lit on so nice. Look at my wrist, neck, filled it with ice. Come as a bitch, so much you roll that dice. Molly, 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 Molly.
Come as a bitch, 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 come as a bitch. And revenge is the motherfucker that I fuck with. Come as a bitch, and revenge is the motherfucker that I fuck with. Come as a bitch, come as a bitch.
So legit, the way I dish it, man, it tend to have a kid. Hey. Go ahead and let them know what you read. I know they can see me, I'm ghost. My bitch get the ball with your big, and we get the ball Billy Ghost. Whoa, whoa. I know they can see me, I'm ghost. 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 My bitch get the ball with your big, and we get the ball Billy Ghost. Now. Yo, this for you. Mother man with it. Woo, woo, woo. Ride through the York with my nigga full of BA. Fuck it up, get it back, nigga, that's a replay. I was teaching niggas fuck a reset. I was on the corner with the deflect. I ain't for the BS. I'ma get my team right, PS. Come up with the fame when I love. These niggas richer, but they broke. I'm allowed to be dope. I remember Bali said I coke. I had to get it. I know they can see me, I'm ghost. I know they can see me, I'm ghost. My bitch get the ball with your big, and we get the ball Billy Ghost. I'm getting that bread by the loaf. I'ma lie to the judge of the oath. I'm that shit that you put in your nose. We them niggas bring us to a show. I'm that nigga gun under his clothes. Red or blue pill. Nigga, I'm popping them both.
thought that bitch it was my fault. I know they can see me, I'm ghost. I know they can see me, I'm ghost. My bitch get the ball with your big, and we get the ball Billy Ghost. Whoa, whoa. I know they can see me, I'm ghost. 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 My bitch get the ball with your big, and we get the ball Billy Ghost. Whoa, whoa. I know they can see me, I'm ghost. I know they can see me, I'm ghost. I know they can see me, I'm ghost.
CoastMixtapes.com.
So I've been watching 2.5 Men for a while now.
Yeah, right.
And something about some Charlie Sheen, you know?
What?
I mean, he gets the mad pussy, bro. Like, for real. Look, let me explain. Okay, got a couple freaks. Met them overseas. Said it like a flow. Put them on their knees. I just want that head. Fuck what's in between. I've been fucking frauds. Call me Charlie Sheen. Got a couple freaks. Met them overseas. Said they like to blow. Put them on their knees. I just want that head. Fuck what's in between. I've been fucking frauds. You can call me Charlie Sheen.
The minute I get it, I hit it, I quit it. I push it so good, I just wanna get in it. I'm counting this money, don't care how I spend it. I'm leasing that house that you rent, you attend it.
Out at the pool.
You know how we roll, fly to the top of my wings, I'ma crawl. When I look down, jump into the crowd. Down to the bottom, say look out below.
Geronimo.
Haters crawl like bugs, they make me itch. Leaning off these drugs, I got that twitch. Need some TV for your mouth because you always talking shit. And if a bitch be tryna snitch, I'll throw my fist, go get a stitch. And I make this shit look easy, no intention to be greedy. Got your girl in a bikini and she built just like a TV. And I knew she in my head, but I ain't know she was a dot. Until we got in bed, fucked around and hit the spot.
Man, you crazy.
I'm insane,
Staying loyal.
never change.
On the daily.
I'm the same, smoking weed to ease my brain. With that ice all on my wrist, it's amazing, I don't freeze. Let me breathe, I'm a freak. You could call me Charlie Sheen.
Got a couple freaks. Met them overseas. Said it like a flow. Put them on their knees. I just want that head. Fuck what's in between. I've been fucking frauds. Call me Charlie Sheen. Got a couple freaks.
That little shit ain't offending me. I don't care about no enemy. Don't act like you kidding me. And I swear you no friend of me. Street come with a penalty. You nigga don't fuck with me. You didn't come up with me. So just keep that same energy. 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 This shit ain't offending me. I don't care about no enemy. Don't act like you kidding me. Just keep that same energy. I'm lit in this bitch. Go off. Shoot at the whip, knock the door off. Pick up my feet, take a load off. Then I pick up my phone, get a bow off. Yeah, designing my fabric now. Hit the bar and we cashing out. That little bitch we didn't have a while. Yeah, you fuck with her, hand me down. Yeah, sauce rat goose, sick brand new, stealth man new. Now I'm under they skin tattoo. The shit past due is my rear view. Hey, what's up with the attitude? All this is factual. I'm doing what you didn't have to do. You didn't fuck with the dude, I wasn't seeing you. Didn't give a fuck about seeing you. She didn't call me back then, I was bust. Now they see me in public and rush me. But now my heart cold as a slush. And I'm loud in this bitch, you can't hush me. Yeah, now they ride me like a saddle. Up in this bitch, check the ladder. Yeah, swear the boy pockets got fatter. And don't fuck with me now. That shit ain't offending me. I don't care about no enemy. Don't act like you kidding me. And I swear you no friend of me. Street come with a penalty. You nigga don't fuck with me. You didn't come up with me. So just keep that same energy. 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 This shit ain't offending me. I don't care about no enemy. Don't act like you kidding me. Just keep that same energy. I don't care about the hawk, cause we strapped in this bitch. Please don't get whacked in this bitch. Falling deep at the club, just to pop us some bottles and leave out the the back of that bitch. I'm on purchase some Zan, just smoking on gas. I'm way too relaxing this bitch. Fuck that hoe, can't keep track of that bitch. Man, I'm texting that bitch, then I'm passing that bitch. Yeah, you can have. I swear I wasn't having shit, now I'm demanding shit. Go to the mall, get the man. Get my load up in packages, cut out my cabbages. I need it off of my sanity. They behave for no reason, raw with no season. I need to charge them with trees. I'm a king, call me Steven. Bitch, catch my semen. I had to bless her like that. City, what you up to? Nigga know what fuck you. You ain't been around, can't trust you. Pocket swole like a buff dude. You need to reroute. I'm in my bag, no recruit. Just keep that same energy, I wasn't the topic. I'm in the trap and I'm counting out the profit. Keep that same energy, I wasn't the topic. I'm in the trap and I'm counting out the profit. This shit ain't offending me. I don't care about no enemy. Don't act like you kidding me. And I swear you no friend of me. Street come with a penalty. You nigga don't fuck with me. You didn't come up with me. So just keep that same energy. 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 This shit ain't offending me. I don't care about no enemy. Don't act like you kidding me. Hey, just keep that same energy.
Bang it in your home, bang it in your car, bang it in your car, bang it with your squad. We go on, I will bang for my culture. Old styles, yo, I'm fly as a vulture. The model goes in sculpture. I'm in my bag, check the flow original. You ain't even know, cause you got to too slow, like in slow-mo for show. Show you how to get the dough. The underground, if you wonder how I move around, and I move the crowd. Hands clap, when the back, take it back. When this was that, real rap, that's real rap. If you love hip-hop, then you should feel that. I feel that the game done changed, cause these ladies trying to gain fame off another nigga name, swag and all that. What you call that? Fuck y'all, cats, I'm underwork for life. Still, I'm really underwork for life. I spit my testimony on the mic. We gon' bang on this shit all night. Bang this, bang this, bang this. Bang it in your home, bang it in your car, bang it in your car, bang it with your squad. We go hard, you should bang this, bang this, bang this, bang this. Bang it in your home, bang it in your car, bang it in your car, bang it with your squad. We go hard, you should.
UWR Priority Artists.
Where's my 40? My 40 acres in my mule. See, I'm trying to keep my cool. They done played us for a fool. Where's my 40? After all you put us through and the evil that you do, we just trying to live like you. So where's my 40? My 40. But where's my 40? My 40. But where's my 40? My 40 acres in my mule. See, they play me for a fool. So I'm about to lose my cool. Where's my 40? I win all the issue promised me. See, 40 acres is land, I want my property. We can build together, don't gotta be a monopoly. I just wanna live my life without you stopping me. Only got one life to live, I gotta make it. So if you ain't got it to give, I gotta take it. My rent and these bills is real, I can't fake it. And the IRS be on my ass, and I can't shake it. Yeah. I guess you thought it was cool, cause some graduated from school and got a house with a pool, a watch, bracelet, and necklace that's all covered in jewels. But only the ignorant niggas was fooled. I ain't trying to stunt, I'm trying to move from the back to the front and be equal so all my people can be what they want. Don't take this next statement as a threat or a front, but to be blunt, we better get what we want, motherfucker. So where's my 40? My 40 acres in my mule. See, I'm trying to keep my cool, but they done played us for a fool. So where's my 40? After all you put us through and the evil that you do, we just trying to live like you. So where's my 40? My 40. Where's my 40? Where's my 40? My 40. Where's my 40? Where's my 40? My 40 acres in my mule. See, they play me for a fool, so I'm about to lose my cool. Where's my 40? Cause I know you don't think repaying us was giving us our so-called freedom like you were saving us. The slave masters became cops and they're still slaying us. All because we're misunderstood and they're afraid of us. So you betrayed our trust talking about you saving me. Protect and serve? Nah, it's more like modern day slavery. You send us to the cage of the grave and it ain't savory. America, home of the brave, showing their bravery. Yeah, so we really ain't get a thing. And please don't say you gave us the support to the music game. Cause along with that came the dope, pills and cocaine, and the most addicted drug of them all, better known as fame. So So, to make a long story short, your debts ain't repaid, cause you gave us a ball in the court. New whips and chains, some dames, and a few new drugs to snort, cause in the end you still coming up short. Motherfuckers, I want my 40. My 40 acres in my mule. See, I'm trying to keep my cool, but they done played us for a fool. Where's my 40? After all you put us through, when the evil is you do, we just trying to live like you, so where's my 40? My 40. Where's my 40? Where's my 40? My 40. Where's my 40? Where's my 40? My 40 acres in my mule. See, they play me for a fool, so I'm about to lose my cool. So where's my 40? Yo, where's my 40? Who got my 40? Where's my 40? Who took my 40? Where's my for real, you got my 40? Hey, yo, Phil, you see my 40? Where's my 40? Give me another oldie, man. We did this shit cause we had to, and I ain't stopping till my mother in that castle. I'm on this bag, I don't know why you mad, but full speed on the gas, they smell a lot when I pass through. Time to run it up with the gang, nigga. No games, nigga, I'm still here with the same niggas. My whole team, we ain't playing with you. No games, nigga, I'm still here with the same niggas.
Remember I was broke, all that money I was missing it. It's level and it's differences, fucking all of these mistresses. It's fish up in the sea, I guess my team gon' be the fishermen. The posture's so militant like Jordan when he dishing it, yeah. I cross them over cause they started doing mixy shit. To ease the pain, I flood the wrist, 340 out the government. Them oppers on that sucker shit, big bird, I had to pluck it quick. My brothers who I'm fucking with for anyone, dumped 100 clip, yeah. No hesitation, to that bag, yeah, we racing. Mama told me be patient, once you get it, they start hating. Start forming all these relations, reach their hands, I ain't shaking. Bad little bitch, yeah, she shaking. T.O.D. we really made it. Out the trench on some army shit. Trap on tilt, supply the strip. And you know we hiring. Put 10K inside the strip. Like this my shit, the lion's den. You heard wrong, I'm not your friend. T.O.D. we did it again. Flood to protect and secure my skin. Gang.
We did this shit cause we had to, and I ain't stopping till my mother in that castle. I'm on this bag, I don't know why you mad, boo. Full speed on the gas, they smell a lot when I pass through. Time to run it up with the gang, nigga. No games, nigga, I'm still here with the same niggas. My whole team, we ain't playing with you. No games, nigga, I'm still here with the same niggas. I can't fuck with you if you out here moving funny style. Running wild, I'm shmoney dancing to that money now. Since a child, I just wanted to make my mother proud. Fell in love with this music, time for me to say my vows. Got a thou and I flipped it back into another dial. Put it all in this movement, grooving through the fucking town. With the gang, it ain't no thing to get 100 rounds. Youngest hungry to get this money and we on the prowl. Yeah, you niggas really not stopping shit. I got no time for the mentions or the gossip shit. They talk about us cause we always been the topic, bitch. Bitches want my phone crazy, stupid, had to block the bitch. Yeah, I'm always here with the same niggas. Louis T.O.D., yeah, they know the name, nigga. I'm just known for spitting this flame, nigga. No games, nigga, get introduced to this pain, nigga. We did this shit cause we had to, and I ain't stopping till my mother in that castle. I'm on this bag, I don't know why you mad, boo. Full speed on the gas, they smell a lot when I pass through. Time to run it up with the gang, nigga. No games, nigga, I'm still here with the same niggas. Facts. My whole team, we ain't playing with you. No games, nigga, I'm still here with the same niggas.
I'm cool, calm, collective. This money on my checklist. When you broke out here, you start moving reckless. Niggas gotta respect it. Everything I did, I don't regret it. You only live once, don't forget it. I see myself like Rollo in a Rari, fuck a Tahoe. I'm trying to swerve the potholes. Big hefe like I'm Pablo. Odds up at the top low. Got cheese like Nacho. Crack your shell, you a taco. I need my money pronto or I'm OJ in a Bronco. Nigga bag talk, I ain't really with the convo. I'm getting older like where all the time go. December 8th, young nigga was letting off that rondo in these streets like I'm John Doe. And if it ain't about that money, nigga, dead your convo. I'm with the gang, nigga. Keep it 100, they do the same with you. And ever since I was born, I've been the same nigga. You play with me if you want, and I ain't playing with you. We did this shit cause we had to, and I ain't stopping till my mother in that castle. I'm on this bag, I don't know why you mad, boo. Full speed on the gas, they smell a lot when I pass through. Time to run it up with the gang, nigga. No games, nigga, I'm still here with the same niggas.
My whole team, we ain't playing with you. No games, nigga, I'm still here with the same
I just
niggas.
wanted more life, less drama and more commas. Make a toast to the game and make sure that we all got us. We did this through the rain, ain't none of y'all gonna stop us. TLD, they know the name, and they saying that we the topic, that's gangster.
Wild style became old style. JFK changed the game, nigga with attitude. Running 100 miles before my crack came and bowed. It's formed the verbs and nouns. Proclaim the original styles, aka. Yo, I drink from this big cup, my pimp cup. Take a big gulp, turn the bass up before I turn the place up. If you ride with the squad, know you safe enough. Tell me rolling with the big homie. Get it up, how you live it up? Cause I'm coast to coast, shouts to all my coast that I'm picking up. Happy to see my G's live it up. Y'all can see me cause you not quick enough. Keep an eye out for. And the underworld team seldom seen on the screen. When you see us on this big screen, getting cream. Still on the block, surfing fiends with that rock. Shit don't stop, see me on the block, say what up, You need original styles in your life. Original style in your life. Get up, get out, and get something before you die. If you fail, at least you try. You should just enjoy the fried shit. I climb while others slip and slide. Never get it like I told you till I die. Who am I done told ya. If I don't know ya, I got 3 words for ya. Fuck out of here. We're taking over this shit. Underworld is in your ear. Raise them glasses in the air. Engineer on this track here, bringing hip hop back here. Like, where'd it go? Y'all pussy cats is too sexual, so homo. Leave dudes chopped and screwed like slow-mo. There's too many lanes in the game. Original style, too much fame. Time to change things like rearrange. We the game. Remember the name. Underworld is taking over the world like Pinky in the Brain. Know what I'm saying? Original styles in your life. You need original styles in your life.
Ripping the ones and twos with the hottest new joints. Coast to coast mixtape DJ.
Danger. Bring it back. Brace yourself. I put your head in your lap. Taste yourself. Your man running up is a waste of help. On my Jeffrey Dahmer, cut out your heart, throw it in the grinder. Cook pancakes and use it as my Aunt Jemima. The dark side of my thoughts rise when I'm caged in. I talk slicker than Ali at the weigh-in. I should end it here, but I got more in store. I won't get into detail of shipping them retail and making them greet me like the Lord of War. Trying to stack my paper, not be mad at you, cause I'm curious about the culture in Africa. They want me living life something like Attica, so I'm forced to smash your melon like Gallagher. Please do remember how I can get you. Rip your days in half and leave your calendar dismembered. And so it seems the spotlight's on me, so I'ma get the streets what they need. They want that fire, they want that fire. I'ma give them that fire, I'ma give them what they need. And so it seems the spotlight's on me, so I'ma get the people what they feed. They want that fire, they want that fire. I'ma give them that fire, I'ma give them what they need. Cream on the inside, brown on the outside. Talking about my dick chick, open up your mouth wide. You're on one static, change the channel. I can arrange the vigil, just bring some candles. Hit your block like some eggs, how I made them scramble. After that, I'm taking off like Cape Canaveral. I was the force underground with the bass and treble. Now I'm the heat on the surface like a solar panel. Fuck the song, it's literal how I do a hater. Leave the body in a tree, call it human nature. Beat your ass with my belt buckle, booty tang ya. Fumigate ya, think you the shit, I duty stain ya. Dig a hole and let a mole find you. Forget 2 guns, you see 4 arms like I close clothesline you. Class is in session if the magnum is the weapon. Somebody get him some help like the classified. So it seems the spotlight's on me, so I'ma get the streets what they need. They want that fire, they want that fire. I'ma give them that fire, I'ma give them what they need. And so it seems the spotlight's on me, so I'ma get the people what they feed. They want that fire, they want that fire. I'ma give them that fire, I'ma give them what they need. In my lane, no games, I'm trying to just win. So I'm a man up, like 9 against 10. I'm hotter than the sun, who wanna shine against him? Got a swimming pool jab, it'll dive in your chin. Y'all act real funny and I'm trying not to grin. How you run to jail but can't dial out the pen? I work shorty out like I styled in the gym, but keep a low profile, proud with the brim. It's me and my team, so grab the towel, throw it in. That's hardcore beef like a cow with some Timbs. Come to my dojo, we can bow and get it in. Crack on the streets, got the competition looking slim. Creme de la creme, yo quiero cualquiera. Let me stop. My flow is a spatula, how I control the pot. My blood pressure cracking the levee over the top, and I can drive the streets crazy, getting show for the night. So it seems the spotlight's on me, so I'ma get the streets what they need. They want that fire, they want that fire. I'ma give them that fire, I'ma give them what they need. And so it seems the spotlight's on me, so I'ma get the people what they feed. They want that fire, they want that fire. I'ma give them that fire, I'ma give them what they need. And so it seems the spotlight's on me, so I'ma get the streets what they need. They want that fire, they want that fire. I'ma give them that fire, I'ma give them what they need. And so it seems the spotlight's on me, so I'ma get the people what they feed. They want that fire, they want that fire. I'ma give them that fire, I'ma give them what they need.
This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you bang in your ear will make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear will make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear will make you cut them off. Hip hop shit, I spit all pit, God's gift. When it comes to your chest, you should guard it. All shots shoot to the sky, that's how you start your hit. Smash, flow, cocaine, and I'm spitting raw shit. Cut a nigga off shit. Now, I'm a big nigga, so no time for small shit. And your soldiers wasn't moving right, that's how your boss got hit. White flag, forfeit, and they knew I had the plug, I was willing to spark it. And I hope you can cash all these checks you forging. The fake thugs with kids turn their kids into orphans. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you bang in your ear will make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear will make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear will make you cut them off.
On your head, but switch up their position. That'll help you listen to the lessons I envision. Need a mess, now minutes miss. Finding them will be no problem. Cause I left the trail to follow. They can use the blood to guide. But I ain't leave none inside. Let out to get the red out. But this ain't Visine. Nightmares or nice dreams. Everywhere that I've been, I've seen the ghetto. So I interlock my blocks and then I stack that Lego. Go when I say so, but no, I never say go. Take your money. If you Mexican, tomaso peso. You got a real fake flow and it lacks potential. If I thought that hell was bad for you, I wouldn't have sent you. Name on my mention. Smash your style and cause a crisis. People begging me for money cause they heard I was the nicest.
This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you bang in your ear will make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear will make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear will make you cut them off.
But now the record companies is like stifling the brother. They trying to make it to whereas rap music is gonna be just propaganda. They telling you what to say. They telling you everything we got now. All that stuff we were saying before was cool because they didn't think nobody was listening. But now they know they listening. They stifling all that. You can't say what you want. You can't do what you want. You can't wear what you want. It's like you know what I'm saying, they straight censoring us. So it's about to be about some street stuff. It's about to be about us, meaning us taking over our own destiny, because it's ours. You can have it. If you ain't seen that from the riots, you ain't seen nothing. That was an uprising. That was us to let these folks know. Any given time, we'll break them off something extremely fun.
This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you bang in your ear will make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear will make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear will make you cut them off.
It's good, cause I have a super gift of gab. Got me stuck in this barrel with these crabs. How that shit go? So I uppercut, jab, jab on these assholes, cause they gas. I'm trying to get out, let me pass. If you see me pass, take a shot and bang on the clan. Fuck, point it on the ground. Niggas can't get down like I get down. Turn this fluid flow into solid sound. Yo, I wear the crown. JFK is back in your town. Bring that underground, kneel down and pound on the ground, shaking everything around. Watch me earthquake on you clowns, haters in the background, standing around with a mean crown. Stop hating. Jumped out the boat before we reach our destination. Now your spot will be taken, even though I'm done doing favors. I'm old school like a pager, plaid blazer, 87 player. I'm the future like a movie trailer. Haters usually be hella failures. Bitch dudes hella yellow. I'm the leader of the new school. I will expel ya. If I bust the rhymes, bang your head, shout, give me more. Cause I make sure everything remains raw. CBL, criminal by law. Do this, get exposed like a nudist. Got love for my shooters, for the love they shoot ya, execute ya. Feel my fire for no reason. Feel my earth, wind and burn like Richard Pryor for your treason. I come to change the game like the season. Remain breathing, breezing, throw a curveball. Got you cats wheezing like a fur ball. Cause your niggas soft as a nerve ball. I got the goal to pray for my downfall. Don't hear the shit clearly. Shove this mic in your ear so you can hear me. Or just cut it off. I bring the pain for the hurt and loss. This the underworld holocaust.
This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you bang in your ear will make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear will make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear make you cut them off. This is that hip hop that you asked for. That shit you banging in your ear will make you cut them off.
Shouts to K-Smash, Crisis, my underworld officials and my underworld affiliates. We're doing this for real hip hop, man. Rest in peace to Tupac the Immortal. Much love. We're doing it for real hip hop, man. Old style.
It's a never be broke production, motherfucker.
This is hip hop. This is hip hop.
Tell me what you think. All I got is money in the bank. Niggas said so shifty, but I can't. All I know is we are not the same. Yeah. Tell me what you think. All I got is money in the bank. Niggas said so shifty, but I can't. All I know is we are not the same. Yeah. I sold it cause I had to. My phone ringing, I'ma need another bag too. What's the meaning? They just hating cause they had to. Still blinging with no jewelry cause I have to. I'm sad too, but it's nothing, this pain is tatted on me. I'm about my bread like I need that cheese and that no bologna. Remember days we were eating nothing with beef or brownie. But now they know me for riding dirty, come pull up on me. Don't talk to me about struggle, nigga, no, I've been through it. And you can't sit at the table, you bringing nothing to it. I never said that you had to, but someone gotta do it. And if you had common sense, you make $1 through it. I maintain and remain sane. I I never miss her. I'm sorry, Grandma, regret the day when I should've visited. Told me stay focused and I'ma win it. They in my business. They wanna destroy my presence. They wanna ruin Christmas. Tell me what you think. All I got is money in the bank. Niggas said so shiesty, but I can't. All I know is we are not the same. Yeah. Tell me what you think. All I got is money in the bank. Niggas said so shiesty, but I can't. All I know is we are not the same. Yeah. You not my nigga, I cut you off, then cut you out. Cut off your legs, no runny nose, can't run your mouth. Your funeral is a closed casket, cause you a mouse. I wish you well, you tattletale, you mighty mouth. I'm headed south with Florida water, a bag of ounce. It's been announced, I'm colorblind, don't mispronounce. Don't see green, I sing things, I close my mouth. Hopped off the couch, I'm so white, I'm all about the money count. Get it, flip it, the art of hustle. We make it work, we move that weight and it's off the muscle. And you get stronger when people tell you that they don't love you. I bet they teach you it's only you, no one above you. I must be tripping, I guess it's money that got me sipping. Got bitches stripping, make Muslim women denounce religion. They never listen, don't crave love, they crave attention. They reminiscing about wasted time, they want redemption. Tell me what you think. All I got is money in the bank. Niggas said so shiesty, but I can't. All I know is we are not the same. Yeah. Tell me what you think. All I got is money in the bank. Niggas said so shiesty, but I can't. All I know is we are not the same.
Haters wanna see me fail, bitches wanna see me lose. My ex nigga want me back, had to cut that nigga loose. I'm so focused now, homie, ain't no stopping me. I got him on some shook ones, Mark deep. I killed that quiet storm, yeah, silently. I'm not Nicki, I'm not Rim, I'm not Cardi B. I'm not Fox, I'm not Kim, just a new MC. So when y'all mention female rappers, that's including me. I'm like Nana with a microscope, you can't see. But I will matter just like Adams, and I'm not Eve. I'm Albert Einstein with these prophecies. Martin Luther King having all these dreams. I foresee a lot, do y'all copy me? I'm foreseeing motherfuckers not stopping me. I break this shit down scientifically. And now I make statements, my lawyers speak. So fuck your evidence, I don't cop the pleas. And I don't need a hook, let me ride the beat. I'm walking with my heels on in confidence. You walking with your heels, so trying not to trick. This is for the have and the have-nots. And Jesus walked the water, could I tread on top? Tap, tap, could I tread on top? Tap, tap, could I tread on top? Tap, tap, could I tread on top?
And Jesus walked the water, could I tread on top?
They put the pressure on me and it made a diamond. I know my time is near, that's why I'm still grinding. We may be talking greatest, maybe talking greatest. I heard you had some words for me, let me demonstrate it. I'm really that real, I'm really from the Ville. I still love the smell of bullet shells, let me chill. See how Brooklyn made me, her life is crazy. I'm just trying to make my son $1 million, baby. You know I got that slick talk, that slick talk. I'm in the major leagues with the big dogs. Niggas can't fuck with me, not at all. I'm a pit on this beat with lock jugs. With lock jugs. With lock jugs. I'm a pit on this beat with lock jugs.
Look at you and look at me. Look at me and look at you. Niggas in the back trying to still catch up to the level that I took it to. Say a lot for the niggas in the back. One time we can do it like electric boogaloo. We can do it for the niggas in the track with the pack, real rap, cause you know how a nigga do. Look at you and look at me. Look at me and look at you. Niggas in the back trying to still catch up to the level that I took it to. Say a lot for the niggas in the back. One time we can do it like electric boogaloo. We can do it for the niggas in the track with the pack, real rap, cause you know how a nigga do. time and time again. I'ma give 195%. Whenever I decide to vent, getting sucked off right behind the tent. I got a cause and a couple shot percent. Rubber extendo, popping in. You niggas faking, I will not pretend. Rubber ballpoint pen, the document. Okay, where do I begin? Wait a minute, your oxygen. Man, I never got the ring like opposite. If a bitch act up, pop a friend. Loot game, everything is top end. Tryna stack more chips to IBM. If you see Hawk smash, it's probably him. Bitch got the Chun-Li with the bop pin. If it ain't Lou Phil's, not the trend. Man, it's way too much toxicant. Never tried cocaine, it's a box of 10. Throw 100 like the George Washington. White Jim when you came and try your chin. I'ma fuck around and catch you 5 to 10. With the cowboy boots and slide it in. If it take one look, it's common sense. It's common sense. Look at you and look at me. Look at me and look at you. Niggas in the back trying to still catch up to the level that I took it to. Say a lot for the niggas in the back. One time we can do it like electric boogaloo. We gon' do it for the niggas in the track with the pack. Real rap, cause you know how a nigga do. Look at you and look at me. Look at me and look at you. Niggas in the back trying to still catch up to the level that I took it to. Say a lot for the niggas in the back. One time we can do it like electric boogaloo. We can do it for the niggas in the track with the pack. Real rap, cause you know how a nigga do. I feel a vibe till my driver bust you. Roll up and I take a puff or two. Ball main, if you mad to bust a move. And you wonder why I hold them fuck with you. Never wait for a prostitute to choose. Got a game plan that you won't refuse. They be like, goddamn, what Neston did. I be like, goddamn, what don't I do? They gon' do it why? Cause I told them to. A phone pop and the bill is overdue. You can take it from a kid that broke the rules. I tell these young boys chill, go to school. I got my wrists on chill like frozen food. Got a real bad bitch to hold the pool. Let my Jew boy customize the cars. He gon' take an antique from old to new. From old to new. Look at you and look at me. Look at me and look at you. Niggas in the back trying to still catch up to the level that I took it to. Say a lot for the niggas in the back. One time we can do it like electric boogaloo. We gon' do it for the niggas in the track with the pack. Real rap, cause you know how a nigga do. Look at you and look at me. Look at me and look at you. Niggas in the back trying to still catch up to the level that I took it to. Say a lot for the niggas in the back. One time we can do it like electric boogaloo. We can do it for the niggas in the track with the pack. Real rap, cause you know how a nigga do. Know how a nigga do.
Wonder.
I love her like she loving me. She know I miss her like she missing me. The way we love is uncontrollably. We overthinking love through energy. 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 Them vibrations that you bring to me. She know I love her like she loving me. She know I miss her like she missing me. The way we love is uncontrollably. We overthinking love through energy. 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 The vibrations that you bring to me. I feelin' what we feelin' for. I'm reaching up for a star. Sitting on the moon, looking over the Pluto. That's where you go. But baby, let me tell you something. No reason fake, no reason front. All I want is keep it 100. I love her like she love me and she want it. She know I love her like she loving me. She know I'm missing like she missing me. The way we love is uncontrollably. We overthinking love through energy. 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 The vibrations that you bring to me. She know I love her like she loving me. Right by my side is where she wants to be. Don't make me look or baby take a peek. Just guarantee you all don't wanna see. Everything I got is waiting for. I got for you baby, I'll give you more. And anything you want, I'll break it off. Half and never take a loss. We play a team and that's on everything. You know whatever I'll forever bring. I get that money I'll forever save. We love each other and it stays the same. Now tell me what's the game? Never hurt you, never bring you pain. She know I love her like she loving me. She know I miss her like she missing me. The way we love is uncontrollably. We overthinking love through energy. 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 Them vibrations that you bring to me. She know I love her like she loving me. She know I'm missing like she missing me. The way we love is uncontrollably. We overthinking love through energy. We overthinking love through energy. We overthinking love through energy.
I'm outside right now. I'm actually on the block. On my ass. About to spit a freestyle rap. I'm out here. Yeah. This shit crazy how you can do this shit. Yeah. If I had this shit back in the day when I was on my time, this shit be crazy, man.
Underworld ENT coming to you.
I'm out here. I'm out here. I'm out here. I'm out here. On the block another time, I'm out here. Gotta drop another rhyme, I'm out here. Know it's by the nick of time, I'm out here. Your niggas down and out there, I'm out here. Your niggas know I'm back in the place, y'all. Your niggas about to catch it to your face, y'all. Your niggas getting hit with the face, y'all. Your niggas got the fifth, well I'm out here. You wanna come and get, well I'm out here. Old styles and you know this niggas out here.
Yo man, we tuning in. Underworld Official, Underworld Radio Station, Underworld Movement. It's Underworld everything. Yeah!
I'm out here. I'm out here. Your niggas talking heavy shit, I'm out here. Your niggas really wanna get them out here. You really talking real shit, I'm out here. Got the motherfucking cat.
I'm on my way up, way up. Fuck all you haters, cause I'm on my way up, my way up.
Underworld Radio, who we got on the line?
And I'ma say Underworld.
Underworld. Hold up. Keep the hype. It's Underworld. It's an Underworld thing coming on.
You already
gotta
know.
come up. The Underworld gonna win.
Let's get it. It's how we do right now, man.
Yo, I'm not an industry nigga. I'm an industry nigga. You feel me? I'm that black rose that grows from that concrete. You feel me? Like it all started in the underworld, man.
Let's go.
Styles,
Let's
man.
go.
It's Mr. Make It Happen, better known as O3 Magic. Jimmy Hoffa _103rd on Instagram. You feel me? Come fuck with your boy. Go holla at New Jersey number one hip hop, man. Especially if y'all from New Jersey. The platform is there for golf. You know what I'm saying?
Lines are definitely open. 856-270-8846. We live in the building, y'all. Underworld Radio. Let's go.
King. It's okay. I really need you to show me. Won't let these niggas hold me. So many to hold me. I do my dirt by my lonely. Won't turn me back to the old me. Shout out my brother, my woody. Burning tree made me feel holy. And it's free, all of the homies. Trick this my game and I'm Kobe. Can't tell the time on the rolling. Now I don't need no more homies. Bitch, I'm the cake, you gon' blow me. Pockets so swole like Big Brody. Freak, just text me like joke me. They say I'm clean like I'm soapy. Socking the two on McFoley. Out here, but really I'm low key. I'm lit, forget that you know me. No laughing, nah, no joking. I miss 2 Fridays like Smokey. Just when you dig and you cozy, you getting clapped with the 40. Told them that they do not know me. Skinny hut, just bulky. But I do not want that. No. Left on red like roll. Yo, chicken head like pole. Yo, crazy or they low. Eat it all like cold. Chocolate no homo. I just crush see that I'm waving. Shout out to them times when I was broke because they made me. Tall like shooters, but they really pump faking. But better know his place before he never make it home. Never round third base. Never ever seen his face. Didn't even leave a trace. If he didn't leave a trace, then he don't got a case. Young, but I'm strong. King strong like Mike. King strong like Sprite. Rubber grip, good night. Have a taste, take a sip. Leave him froze like ice. Blew away like Crip. Shook I like really ice. Need you to show me, won't let me hold me. So many to hold me. I do my dirt by my lonely. Won't turn me back to the old me. Shout out my brother, my woody. Burning tree make me feel holy. And it's free, all of the homie. Trick this my game and I'm Kobe. Can't tell the time on the rollie. Nah, I don't need no more homies. Bitch, I'm the cake, you gon' blow me. Pocket so full like Big Brody. Freak, just text me like choke me. They say I'm clean like I'm soapy. Socking the two on McFoley. But I do not want that. No. Left on red like Roco. Chicken head like Po. Yo, crazy or than loco. Eat it all like Coco. Chocolate no homo. I just crush like four. Now I need like four. King.
You say something, better mean that. Before you sign, need to read that. Nigga sliding for a feedback. Only apologetic when the dice crap. Can't take life back. My young nigga got a shit bag. Still with the shit black. Drill with the big bag. Zombie tips knock off your gut like a 6-pack. Hold up, I'ma catch 'em all, throw 'em like a Pokeball. Aim this blow at your body, knock a shoulder off. Mr. Bacon soda soft, hit the bank, blow it off. Flipping all these babies, chopping roosters like a Foster Farm, yeah. Flash the Ruger like a Costco card, yeah. I trap with shooters till the shot clock off, yeah. I'm Ferris Bueller when the cops get called. Wait, I'd probably wake up on a yacht tomorrow for real. Just chill, focus on the meals. Is you the type to jeopardize a hoe for the thrill? Never make a wife out of hoe in the field. Long nights with the dope on the scale. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. The ice on my grill. I know how it feel. To ride with that drill. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. How it feel to be real. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. I know. Trouble, it pass, it comes and go. I split that gas, that Texaco. My plug get packed from Salvador. I know what to do next, yeah. Flipping money like a suplex. Bullets tag your whole crew, call it group sex. I know how to send it. She know I ain't scripted. She know for a fact I'm the realest she had been with. I don't know these bitches, but I know what their intent is. I know if I let her give me top, I'm gon' resent it. Calvin Klein draws crotch cover with her lipstick. Man, I'm tired of bro codes. Sick of y'all, that's a throw code. Now watch me ball on a GoPro. Wait, I be in LA where you don't go. Yeah, I still pull up on you, bolo. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. The ice on my grill. I know how it feel to ride with that drill. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. How it feel to be real. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. I know. I know. I know. Trouble, it pass, it comes and go. I split that gas, that Texaco. My plug get packed from Salvador. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. The ice on my grill. I know how it feel to ride with that drill. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. How it feel to be real. I know how it feel. I know how it feel. I know how it feel.
Open the door. It's me, motherfucker. Let me up. Bitch, niggas going down. Can't stop me. I'm on my way up. My way up. Way up. Fuck all you haters, 'cause I'm on my way up. My way up. My way up. You can't stop me. I'm on my way up. My way up. My way up. Fuck all you haters, 'cause I'm on my way up. My way up. My way up. Down. with Snake. Yo, my grass is mowed down, way down. Make these clowns frown when they see that shit ain't funny. Getting in the ass of you dummies, make you talk for me, blow that hawk for me. You ain't get that. Get your wick pushed back like a shotgun. Cock back, mad kick back, click clack. It's the sound of the strap on my way up. It's the strap, niggas stays up, cause they laid up with a pimp cup. And what's up? Turn up. This is fire. Make him retire and burn up. Hold up, roll up. I could get the party so up. I am SUK sticker, kid, so suck. So what? On my way up. Yo, they say I spit so much, still I feel I don't say enough. I am coming up. Haters talking tough. Time to call your bluff. You was acting up, had me cracking up like you were macking stuff. I see your timeline, online credentials just ain't adding up. Now I'm mad as fuck. This shit'll blow your bladder up, cause it's too much. This one I puff is loud as fuck. Yo, it's going down when I turn up. I'm the world, once the world, what?
Can't stop me, I'm on my way up, on my way up, on my way up. All you need is cause I'm on my way up, on my way up, on my way up. You can't stop me, I'm on my way up, on my way up, on my way up. All you hate is cause I'm on my way up, on my way up, on my way up.
Bitch, niggas don't care.
When you absolutely, positively got to kill every mother in the room, except no substitutes.
Leaders of this old school, we ill as tofu. Let me show you how to get to me, here's what you'll go through. I ain't gotta grab to hold you or even bend to fold you. Don't even act like you ain't know, I'm sure somebody told you. My lyrics that they sold you, go get a refund. We don't run unless the law come, I think I saw some. You can't be here where we all are from, that's what you call guns. We got ones that bury sons and tracing where you call from. If they wrong, I saw some. Look at where you'll fall from. If I know my gain is low, my creed is that I claw some. You won't get that, I know you won't, cause sense is never common. Probably thinking I'm just rhyming, but you're not checking the time. And you know if I put time in, then I'm working on the clock. Wasting money, I am not. That laying on the block, I can make your circulation stop and resume on command. If you thought your man would back you up, you need a backup plan. You don't understand or comprehend that I am not a friend. Not yours or anybody's, you're just my means to an end. If I ever see your face again, it better be a vision. Cause next time you get that, I'm turning that to a collision. Listen, well I think you should get checked. Nobody with that disrespect deserves to keep a freaking neck. Your ass too broke to cash that check, so don't you even write it. Like a man with no arms, cause you ain't even trying to fight it. Get back, hey yo. Somebody get the caution tape. Can't believe you said that. It's too late, so who's next to play? Let me demonstrate the way it's gonna be from now on. Better pile on. Take an inch from mine. Get back, hey yo. Somebody get the caution tape. Can't believe you said that. It's too late, so who's next to play? Let me demonstrate the way it's gonna be from now on. Better pile on. Take an inch from mine.
Get my crooked smile on, me and my aliens bout to get that X-Files on. If we jump, you getting piled on. In my prime, I transform on Decepticons, respected on that chin, check a con. Cause you were artists in my rhino just to start shit, rip apart shit. Cause you feds on some narc shit and worse than Noah and Moses make the ark split. My visuals nice with this, I bring a crisis, slice of life, nightstick. Yo, my bars hit
like a nightstick. Haters like this, get back. Niggas get sprayed back, way back. Niggas stay strapped like dice, stay strapped. Hard facts, not that gay rap. This is how it's gon' be. My style is not free. OG for eternity. STDs ain't burning me. Enemies not concerning me. Fuck a degree, ain't no learning me. I should earn a G for being such a G. Fuck with me, I'm bucking 3 from the 45, ready to die. Me, myself, and I. Who's next to play like Judgment Day? Too late, nothing else to say. Bloodbath, feel the wrath of the K. KKK on the way. You know I reppin' J till the death of me. Keep on testing me, get an F, cause you always fail standing next to me. I'm an icon, you are just MC with no destiny. I am lyrical weaponry. Can't believe I said that.
Hey yo, somebody get the caution tape. Can't believe you said that. It's too late, so who's next to play? Let me demonstrate the way it's gonna be from now on. Better pile on, take it in, get back. Hey yo, somebody get the caution tape. Can't believe you said that. It's too late, so who's next to play?
Money look like it's on the comeback. Mama's doing better, got an appetite back. I'll be sipping yak, sipping yak, sipping yak. Keep up with the times, days used to be long. Studio recording the same song. I'll be sipping yak, sipping yak, sipping yak. Got me out of character, girl, you're powerful. Feeling things that I never felt before. I'll be sipping yak, sipping yak, sipping yak.
Yeah, yeah, you know me. Dre be low key. Got yak on me, got pack on me. Spark the street, please. Your life's a blessing. Live, learn lessons. Pain and affection. Sip when we happy, we sip when we stressing. Mind's in detention, stuck with this, blunt with this, loving this. Life will flip up, down. Times this bottle make you smile, times this bottle make you frown. My ace came home from a bid, whole hood came out with them bottles. Time be flying, cause most of us haven't seen homies since high school. We pop these bottles, cause we celebrating. Flip side when I'm off this yak, better not bring confrontation. Flip side, I pop a bottle during conversation. Flip side, I sip this yak just for some toleration. Shit I be facing, shit I be seeing, knowing the facts. I cannot hide from the truth, there ain't no options for that. And I be knowing I got bills to pay, but I'm behind my way to cope with this, to sip away these thoughts all on my mind. Sit there, hit the pussy, make my dick pressure her spine. Ran into some money, now my bank looking alright. We sip yak cause we fly. I overthink when I'm alone, may sip and cry. Sometimes this liquor be having me speak my mind. I'm in my feelings, wondering if my cousin's fine. Hope she's alright.
Money look like it's on the comeback. Mama's doing better, got an appetite back. I'll be sipping yak, sipping yak, sipping yak. Keep up with the times, days used to be long. Studio recording the same song. Got me sipping yak, sipping yak, sipping yak. Got me out of character, girl, you're powerful. Feeling things that I never felt before. I'll be sipping yak, sipping yak, sipping yak.
Surgery after surgery, the same old thing. Hospital visits, doctors, and them same IVs. Cousin, I know you suffer from this vicious disease. Pain and the aches enough to leave you weak in your knees. Trust me, it hurts to think of close ones. Time's ticking, keep them in good spirits. Let them know that you're with them. Every day I be wishing that I had all the answers. Choice for all of these poisons, choice for all of these cancers. You know when blood cells have a hook on them, they say it trims your life expectancy, your days are slim. But not my cousin, she's strong. I can't imagine my auntie watching her child suffer. Look through the the eyes of these fathers, look through the lens of these mothers, enough to let that yak drip. Feel these emotions and gravitate towards the sadness. But yo, my cousin is strong. We gon' pour it up and keep moving on. You built to last, ain't going nowhere. You gon' prove Dr. wrong. So trust me, family, ain't no need to cry. Let's try together and just keep our heads up to the sky. I drink and toast to that, cause lately I've been feeling foul. Chasing this Haney with crown, my liver's probably about to drown. I lost a brother-in-law, his father started a fund to honor his name. I never had the ill to ask him how he dealt with the pain. I wasn't there for the visits, I only saw all the smiles. It's hard to fathom with the vision of him losing his child.
Really look like it's on the comeback. Mama's doing better, got her appetite back. I'll be sipping yak, sipping yak, sipping yak.
Rest the head, bro.
Keep up with the times, days used to be long. Studio recording the same song. I'll be sipping yak, sipping yak,
so stay strong.
sipping yak.
You ain't
Got me
going
out of
nowhere, that's
character,
facts.
girl, you're powerful. Feeling things that I never felt before. I'll be sipping yak, sipping yak, sipping yak.
We built the last.
Instrumental.
I'm up at 8 a.m. feeling kinda odd. Think it should've still arrived. Fuck it, it's Friday, Monday anyway. Getting dressed, feeling funky fresh, like an S on my fucking chest. Feel like it's my day and I'm so blessed. Time to flex. Out the door, a lot of opposite sex. Never seen before, and they all on your more. I ain't lying, I'm a lion, hear me roar. Don't sleep and snore while your rappers trying to rip out and tour. Trying to fly out and fucking soar. Niggas is hype, I ignore. Plus it feels like it's my day. I must say, everything's going my way. See my boy Jay, and he rolls up a J. We be getting so loud. I stroll with a cloud that surrounds like surround sound as I strut through my fucking town. I got 1,500 on the pound. And yeah, it's going down. Time to move this shit around. The street shit, I'm bound. See my homie X gave a pound. He told me the little girl was lost, is now found safe and sound. Praise the Lord, give mad applause. I prayed for the girl that didn't know who she was. Love is love. Recipe to the children above. They need a push, not a fucking shove. Protection of the young. I love every single one. Give praise to God's son till I see the sun. It seems to be my day. My DJ say he got beats for me all day. Tall battle E and J, I'm on my way. Let the MP3 play. This is not what we see every day round my fucking way. No chopper, helicopter, ambulance, and rushing to the doctor. Homeless niggas acting for $1. Didn't even see no chicks on the strip trying to holler. Got a new platform trying to follow. Righteously get the cash, it's my motto. Hit the lotto as I hit the hot spot. It's a shock, I don't see no cops. Something rarely see a lot on the block. Great day, been hearing the rumors on the shots. Homies getting live. Smiling cause the sun is shining like a diamond. I'm thinking about reclining, Corona with a lime in it. Thinking about Rosita Big behind in it. Last time she let me hit, yeah I'm hitting Jack. See if she with it. Gotta go off for my nigga Lyric. Say he got them 2 stacks, he owe, come and get it. Yeah I need that bro, give me a half or so. Gotta grab this blow. Then I'm off to the studio, I go. This day is great, I think I'm having shrimp and steak on my plate. Let's roll the tape. See the nigga Jake, he a snake. We work for the Jake. Keep watching. I could grab this pound, grab this dope, keep walking. I hit the studio, check the toe, this my options. I picked option 1 on my hustle like a crackhead bomb. Gotta get me some, gotta get these crumbs, gotta get this cake. Here I come, Lyric D, son, what up done? Heard you niggas on the run. Where you come from? Everywhere, nowhere, at the same damn time. You know I'm trying to get mine. That's real talk, I know that's real rap. You know a real nigga feel that. Then I heard you still click clack. Realize it's a trap. Damn, it's going down. I just copped the fucking pound. See that clown Jake? The fucking feds running round. Smile turned into a fucking frown. Got me down on the fucking ground. Bag on the ground. I see them infrared beams floating around. Nothing I could do now.
DMs in some squares. You spreading rumors, but I don't really care. You keep on picking, I'ma beat your ass, I swear. Talking down on me, but I don't play fair. You bitches in my DMs in some squares. You spreading rumors, but I don't really care. You keep on picking, I'ma beat your ass, I swear. Talking down on me, but I don't play fair. You like paparazzi, wanna take a picture of me? Like the Hannibal, you wanna wear the skin off me? Cause I'm sexy and you wish you was fly like me. He got a big dick and I got ass on me. I heard he played you and he made you feel quite crazy. But I got his ring and you ain't got nothing on me. I don't know you, but you say that you know me. You're a lurker like my grandma, you so nosy. Say little bitch, calm down. I'm like Mike Tyson in his prime first round. You think you slick? But you a clown. You got me laughing, you a joke in H-Town. You bitches in my DMs in some squares. You spreading rumors, but I don't really care. You keep on picking, I'ma beat your ass, I swear. Talking down on me, but I don't play fair. You bitches in my DMs in some squares. You spreading rumors, but I don't really care. You keep on picking, I'ma beat your ass, I swear. Talking down on me, but I don't play fair. Silicone injections, that's that broke bitch shit. Get that fat transfer, that's that rich bitch shit. You ain't got no edges, I can buy you drops. Call a big booty Judy, cause I heard her shit work. I don't do no dirty shoes, I don't do no short nails. I just do the money walk, like a Mayweather's gal. I just bought me a Rollie, but that shit did nothing for me, so I gave it away, cause that shit does not impress me. Little bitch, calm down. I'm like Mike Tyson in his prime first round. You think you slick, but you a clown. You got me laughing, you a joke in H-Town. You bitches in my DMs in some squares. You spreading rumors, but I don't really care. You keep on picking, I'ma beat your ass, I swear. Talking down on me, but I don't play fair. You bitches in my DMs in some squares. You spreading rumors, but I don't really care. You keep on picking, I'ma beat your ass, I swear. Talking down on me, but I don't play fair. Square up. I don't wanna wear no makeup, no wigs, no nothing. I got something to say. Square up.
Coast to coast. Damn, man. Back at it again with another banger. Underworld.
For those who think they want war, you don't want war. Have me kicking in your front door with the 4-4. Don't make me dumb for real life bars. So pure. MOP, mash your posse. Who want some hardcore, hard to the core. Hard to please, hard to cure. I'm sure I spit manure every time I spit a line. Even if it ain't mine, nigga respect mine. And here go the tech now. Two to his face now. Nobody's safe now. Open up the safe now. What you gotta say now? This is what I'm saying. I won't go in my deep on the whole industry. Going out blasting, taking my enemies with me. If not, these guys are paralyzed. Never forget me. Why do these DJs envy? They don't like the way I funk master flex. These texts I'm asking who gets next. No Khaled in this bitch. We the best out rap. East Coast to the west. Love the kid, that's a fact. Black the cracker let you smoke the shit. The JFK means Jersey fucking. If you didn't notice it, I'ma make you quote the shit. These mumble rappers are hopeless. Can't afford to focus. That bar's over your head if you're not focused. Brain dead for the artists. I start shit. And I bang heads when I battle bar spit. Rappers like to play dead or turn bad.
Real niggas is down the ride. And if I make the call, then they coming, it's getting live. Toe tag, body bag, nigga, that's homicide. Dead with your eyes open, mean you deserve to die. Get down and lay down, fuck a piece, I want the whole pie. 4-5, rock 'em to sleep, that's a lullaby. Catch a cavity, don't play me sweet, now you gotta die. Shells come in pairs of two, then they multiply. Fuck around, be making the news. Chalked on both sides. Tupac and Biggie execution. Catch you in the ride. The way niggas playing with cannons make you electric slide. Out here seeking for niggas. My suggestion high. 2, 4, 5s with silences. Call them Bonnie Clyde. Moses with the stick. What I hit is splits and divides. Bruce Lee shit. Gun kick is kicking you high. 16 in the clip. Hollow tips. You get 9 to 5. Yeah.
To the rhythm. Why they got me trapped in the ghetto? They say I'm a slave to the rhythm. So why they got me trapped in the ghetto? I can't get out, no way out, going out, falling out. Got the thing for you niggas. Don't let me bang on you niggas. Click, clack, bang on you niggas. I can make it rain on you niggas. I can make it rain on you niggas. I can make it rain on you niggas. Click, clack, bang on you niggas.
Fuck your past, baby girl, I'ma give you the future. Them other niggas ain't know what to do, well, I'ma show them how to do, yeah. So you know what's real. You know what's real. Fuck your past, baby girl, I'ma give you the future. Them other niggas ain't know what to do, well, I'ma show them how to do, yeah. So you know what's real. You know what's real. Fuck your past, baby girl, I'ma give you the future. Them other niggas ain't know what to do, well, I'ma show them how to do, yeah. Foreplay, my tongue, it go crazy. We talk, no laziness between. Say she want me fast and I'ma give it to her. Beat that ass down, bend it into ya. But you know it's real. When we make love, you know what's the deal. Fuck your past, baby girl, I'ma give you the future. Them other niggas ain't know what to do, well, I'ma show them how to do, yeah. So you know what's real. You know what's real. Fuck your past, baby girl, I'ma give you the future. Them other niggas ain't know what to do, well, I'ma show them how to do, yeah. So you know what's real. You know what's real. Sexy as hell, I'ma give it to me, yeah. She called me ugly, tell me she love my whole soul, what's to me, yeah. Oh, she know it's real. She know, and she love the deal. Hard body, baby, I get used to. And I know you love me the way you supposed to, I do, yeah. Oh, I know just how you feel. Put it on your soul, and you know it's real. Fuck your past, baby girl, I'ma give you the future. Them other niggas ain't know what to do, well, I'ma show them how to do, yeah. So you know what's real. You know what's real. Fuck your past, baby girl, I'ma give you the future. Them other niggas ain't know what to do, well, I'ma show them how to do, yeah. So you know what's real. You know what's real.
Yeah, yeah. Live and direct, eyes wide from wet, machete flow. Michael Myers breath, ride dirty but fresh. Above 30, they call me sire, superior. MacGyver on a journey, hit me and higher, nobody scared of ya. Ride solo, I'm Tony, no Manolo. On the run, please no photo, smoking gun, aiming at mofos. Chip on my shoulder, loyal soldier, God color me mocha. Life is a malfunctioning roller coaster, no amusement. I'm like Lucian from Underworld, plotting on a full moon. I feel funny rocking the fur, slave jeans in my DNA. Super live, I deserve a VMA for this rap alkaline. Keep the faith, trade places with them, no way. All my liquor straight, big faces say I'm doing better than okay. I ain't stressing, I was never for second guessing. Cause I'm the crocodile with the smile beneath the crescent and I'm shitting. This taller is out of order. Hearing voices saying commit a violent slaughter. This is my aura. Sodom and Gomorrah, take a news reporter hostage. Charge him with spreading false gossip. Sully is toxic. Tell her op, stop it, I got it, I won't drop it. Acknowledge it, whether you pray to Jesus or Muhammad.
Team, we everything we say we are. Team, we everything we say we are. Pocket powder, cookie grabber, stomp outer, talk walker, New Yorker, bounce bouncers. Team, we everything we say we are. Team, we everything we say we are.
Sharpen my focus, bars are the dopest. Any subpar rapper, we make them go fish. Notice my shark features. I don't swim with the bottom feeders. Top of the food chain, Sully, feed on the non-believers. Critics being so facetious, like my shit is peaches. I've been poisonous, the leeches told us how I keep it. Dangerous, militant, moving strategic. Third eye, watching my back for security breaches. Evil streets out in Queens with the mark of the beaches. Fiends with shattered dreams, trying to put together pieces. Blocks birthed out, rigor mortis up on the corner. It might spread, night of the living dead stalkers. Married the street, took the chopper to the altar. But she don't never gossip, she just knocked the topping off your hot.
Team, we everything we say we are. Team, we everything we say we are. Pocket powder, cookie grabber, stomp outer, talk walker, New Yorker, bounce bouncers. Team, we everything we say we are. Team, we everything we say we are.
Banger.
Way you changed the game up. Please excuse my ways, it's just the way that I came up. Can't change us, y'all still on the same stuff. Get your change up before you try to claim us or bang us.
Real rap, yo, I still trap. That's a fact, not an act. Like these niggas do on tracks. I'm from the way back. I still am say MCs is whack. Fuck a plaque, I should have a plaque. Build up. Way I use this music just to build up. Got my skills up, pay these bills up. Big up to all my underworld niggas. Yo, we are the sound of the underground. I pound the ground, shake everything around. Create a thunder sound. If you wonder how, I keep real ones around. I don't fuck with clowns or bust downs. I rep the bricks. That's why I take a brick, a pound, and bust it down. Then make my rounds. Fuck my money, bust some rounds. Please excuse me. Just the way that I came up.
Just y'all still on the same stuff.
On the same stuff.
Change up before you try to claim us or
bang us.
Change the game up. But ways is just the way that I came up. Just y'all still on the same stuff.
Same stuff.
I be doing on the 1-2 checker. Motherfucker, chop it black and decker, disrespect her. Another MC like the OSTY to the fucking easy. See me? It's no freebies, it's just a freebie. Freestyle, come to see the old styles on your TV. Underworld is that new hype, and you niggas know I didn't have the right. Just recite freestyle hype, no mic, just on the rap app. I don't give a fuck, bring facts on the track. This is that new age rap for you niggas.
Showtime. You gonna do it from the beginning? Shit. Bitch.
We got smoke to give and we give it for free. Bags in and they in for the cheap. I ain't finna lay over no freak. I'm hitting that hoe and I leave. Street nigga, I'm pulling out weeds. Fucked at the game, they was sleeping on me. Glock 19, I keep it on me. Wish I made wrong and we put him to sleep. Get him out of here. We ride wise in the Jeep. Me, Glock, Ron, and Reek. I'm fucking up back ends at the mall. I'm spending racks on sneaks. Knock him off the map, delete. They have a feast, I tell him to eat. I'm on my way and I ain't reached the peak. That little nigga hot like Texas Pete. Hot. I make your salary every week. I'm in the hills, Beverly. She wanna fuck, let's schedule it. I have a hoe wanna marry me. He say he want smoke, we bury him. Gang on my back, let him. Yeah, these niggas cat like fairy tale. Bitch, I'm good everywhere.
Fuck what you thought, we got big guns. Ride with that Glock, no cap gun. Put that to your head if you owe some. Then pull up on Stunner and smoke one. I got a plug if you need one, cause my niggas moving the hobo. I got a bitch in a Nissan, I'm finna fuck up that whole throat. Niggas won't smoke, then I'm bringing the chimney. Don't know gymnastics, but might use to send me. This clip extended with alternate endings. Run up a check, I don't never get winded. Niggas can't see me, the windows is tinted. Scoop up your bitch in the motherfucking building. You out of line and I'll put you back in it. I bought a strap just to match with the Fendi.
We got smoke to give and we give it for free. Bags in and they in for the cheap. I ain't finna lay over no freak. I'm hitting that hoe and I leave. Street nigga, I'm pulling out weeds. Fucked at the game, they was sleeping on me. Glock 19, I keep it on me. Wish I made wrong and we put him to sleep. Get him out of here. We got smoke to give and we give it for free. Bags in and they in for the cheap. I ain't finna lay over no freak. I'm hitting that hoe and I leave. Street nigga, I'm pulling out weeds. Fucked at the game, they was sleeping on me. Glock 19, I keep it on me. Wish I made wrong and we put him to sleep. Get him out of here.
Packs coming in from the west side while I'm beating your bitch from the backside. I tell her open the mouth wide, she take a hit like the front line. Put him to sleep, it's bedtime. That chopper sing nothing but lullabies. Real nigga, I'm not the mother guys. I fuck a bitch out of panty line. I want that head, CAT scan. She let me fuck, no lap dance. That pussy tight like a wristband. Pass that to my nigga like Steve Nash. I'm fucking bitches in Calabasas. Mail back to work, can't forget your package. Got it for 12, sell it for 21. Ooh, y'all niggas savage.
We got smoke to give and we give it for free. Bags in and they in for the cheap. I ain't finna lay over no freak. I'm hitting that hoe and I leave. Street nigga, I'm pulling out weeds. Fucked at the game, they was sleeping on me. Glock 19, I keep it on me. Wish I made wrong and we put him to sleep. Get him out of here. We got smoke to give and we give it for free. Bags in and they in for the cheap. I ain't finna lay over no freak. I'm hitting that hoe and I leave. Street nigga, I'm pulling out weeds. Fucked at the game, they was sleeping on me. Glock 19, I keep it on me. Wish I made wrong and we put him to sleep. Get him out of here.